You think this is just about some stupid appointment? Daniel's voice cracked through the kitchen. Sharp and cold. You sit there every Thursday like clockwork, grinning at me like nothing's wrong. And you don't even have the decency to tell me what the hell you're really doing. I didn't look up from the cutting board. The knife felt heavy in my hand. It's therapy, Daniel. Right. Therapy. That's what you call it when you disappear for an hour and come back acting like you swallowed the whole self-help section at Barnes Noble. He stepped closer, his shadow falling across the counter. But you know what? It's not the appointments. It's the lying. You keep secrets from me, Evelyn. And then you wonder why I'm done trying. My grip tightened on the knife. I haven't, don't. He held up a hand. Fingers splayed. Just stop. I'm tired of your excuses. I'm tired of walking on eggshells around you because God forbid I say something you don't like. You know what you said last week? You said I was dismissive. Dismissive. Like I'm some kind of monster you have to manage. I didn't mean it like that. No? Well, maybe you should try saying what you actually mean for once. He took a step back, running a hand through his hair. This isn't working. Eve. It hasn't worked in a long time. And I'm done pretending. I put the knife down. The room went quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. What are you saying? He looked at me like I'd asked the stupidest question in the world. I'm saying I'm done. Done sleeping with you. You disgust me. These days I can't even look at you without feeling sick. So figure it out. Whatever it is you need. Whatever hole you're trying to fill with those stupid sessions. Do it without me. I nodded. Just a small dip of my chin. Nothing else. My hands rested flat on the counter. Palms down. I could feel the grain of the wood under my skin. Daniel blinked. That's it. You're not gonna yell. Not gonna cry. Not gonna throw something at me, no. His jaw clenched. Fine. Great. Perfect. Then we're clear. He turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. The sound rattled the dishes in the cabinet. I counted to 10 before I moved. When I did, I went straight to the desk in the corner of the living room. The laptop was already open to my private email account. I clicked through to the secure folder labeled Finances and started pulling up the documents I'd been organizing for the last 3 months. Bank statements, tax returns, credit card reports, Daniel's company benefit summary. All of it clean. All of it backed up to the cloud under a pseudonym. I scrolled through the latest statement from his corporate credit card. There it was again, the charge at the boutique hotel near O'Hare. 2 nights. Last month. Same date as one of my therapy appointments. I highlighted the line and saved it to a separate file. Next. I opened the draft of the letter I'd been writing to my lawyer. Marissa. It was short. Direct. I need to talk about separation options. He's made it clear he doesn't want to be married to me anymore. I added a few lines about the verbal abuse, the financial discrepancies, and the fact that our daughter Sophie deserved better than this environment. I closed the laptop and stood up. The house felt too big, too quiet. I found myself at the dining table, staring at the wedding photo in its silver frame. Daniel's smile had been wide then, genuine. My veil had caught the light just right. We looked happy. We looked like we knew what we were doing. I picked up the frame and carried it to the kitchen, set it on the counter beside the sink, turned on the tap, let the water run until it was warm, then poured a glass. I drank it standing there, looking out the window at the neighbor's yard. The grass was freshly mowed. The swing set was empty. Somewhere in the distance, a car alarm went off. I didn't flinch. When the glass was empty, I dried my hands on a dish towel and went back to the desk. Opened the laptop again. Found the encrypted folder labeled Evidence. Inside were audio recordings, screenshots, and the PI's preliminary report. I hadn't told Daniel about any of this yet. He thought I was still reeling from his confession, still trying to process the wreckage. He was wrong. I clicked on the most recent recording. His voice filled the room, sharp with sarcasm. You think I'm the problem? Jesus. Eve. Maybe if you spent half as much time fixing yourself as you do blaming me, we wouldn't be in this mess. I listened to it twice, then deleted the file. It was time to move forward. not dwell. The next step was simple. I needed to update my will, change the beneficiary on my retirement accounts, and make sure Sophie's college fund was protected. I called Marissa first thing in the morning, using the blocked number she'd given me. "I'm ready," I said when she answered. "Are you sure about this?" Her voice was careful, professional. "Yes." She paused. "Okay. I'll draw up the papers today. But Evelyn, you need to be prepared. He's not going to make this easy." "I know." We hung up, and I sat there for a moment, staring at the blank screen of the laptop. The cursor blinked, patient and unyielding. Outside, the sun was setting. The light slanted through the blinds, casting stripes across the floor. I thought about Daniel's face when I nodded at him. The shock, the confusion. He'd expected tears, anger, maybe even a plate thrown against the wall. What he got was silence, and that silence had already begun to eat at him. I closed the laptop and stood up. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like a place I was leaving, and I knew exactly how to do it. The coffee tasted bitter, but I didn't add sugar. I sat at the kitchen island, watching the steam curl up toward the ceiling. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. Daniel had left for work before dawn, which was unusual. He usually lingered, made a show of ignoring me, but this morning he'd packed his gym bag, kissed Sophie's forehead without waking her, and slipped out without a word. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls, just the calendar reminder, 9 a.m. consultation with Marissa. I finished the coffee in 2 gulps and stood up. The envelope with the financial documents was already in my purse, tucked beneath the tablet. I double-checked the locks on the front door, then drove to the cafe 2 blocks away. I needed the caffeine, and I needed witnesses. If Daniel decided to spin this later, I wanted people who could confirm I'd been out all morning. Marissa was already at the corner table when I arrived, nursing a black tea. She looked up and gave me a small nod. Her expression was serious but not unkind. "You look tired," she said. "I didn't sleep," I replied, sliding into the chair across from her. She pushed a folder across the table. "Here's the basic breakdown for Illinois divorce law. Property division, spousal support, child custody thresholds. You'll want to read it, but I'll give you the highlights." I flipped it open. The pages were dense, but I focused on the key points. Equitable distribution didn't mean equal, but it leaned that way unless there was misconduct. Spousal support was calculated based on income disparity and length of marriage. Custody favored the primary caregiver, provided there was no history of abuse. "His hiding income," I said, tapping the section on financial disclosures. Marissa raised an eyebrow. "How do you know?" I pulled the bank statements from my purse and laid them out on the table. Corporate credit card charges that don't match his expense reports. Bonus deposits that never appear on our joint tax returns. He's been diverting money into a separate account for at least 6 months. Her eyes narrowed. "Do you have proof, enough to get a subpoena?" I folded the statements back into the envelope. "I also have transcripts of his conversations, verbal threats, emotional abuse. It's all documented." Marissa leaned back in her chair. "You've been busy. Desperate times," I said. "He told me yesterday he's done sleeping with me, that I disgust him, that he can't even look at me." Her jaw tightened. "That's textbook emotional abuse, Evelyn. And it's relevant to custody if it's affecting Sophie." "It is." I hesitated. "She's been asking why Daddy doesn't hug her anymore, why he sleeps on the couch." "I don't have good answers." Marissa made a note in her pad. "We'll use that. But you need to be careful. If he senses you're preparing to leave, he might escalate. Financial retaliation, custody threats, even physical intimidation. I've considered that." I met her gaze. "That's why I'm here." She nodded. "Okay. Here's what we'll do next. First, you'll open a separate bank account. Use a different bank, preferably one he doesn't frequent. Transfer a portion of the household savings into it. Don't touch the retirement accounts yet, we'll deal with those later. Second, start documenting everything. Screenshots of bank statements, copies of credit card receipts, audio recordings of any hostile interactions. Third, will file for legal separation before he has a chance to hide more assets. And custody, will request primary physical custody with supervised visitation until we can establish a pattern of stability. Your role as the main caregiver gives us leverage. I closed the folder. What about the house? We'll negotiate a buyout or sell it and split the proceeds. Either way, you'll need temporary housing lined up. I can recommend a realtor who specializes in these situations. The waitress came by to refill our cups. I asked for another coffee. Marissa declined. One more thing, she said, lowering her voice. You need to protect your devices. Change your passwords. Enable two-factor authentication. If he's tech-savvy, he might try to access your accounts. I nodded. Already done. We finished the meeting with a handshake and a promise to reconvene in a week. As I walked back to my car, I felt the weight of the envelope in my purse. It wasn't just paper, it was leverage. It was freedom. Back at the house, Sophie was coloring at the kitchen table. She looked up when I came in. Mommy, Daddy left without saying goodbye. He had an early meeting, I said, forcing a smile. How's the picture coming? It's a rainbow. She held it up. Can we hang it on the fridge? Of course. I helped her tape it to the magnetic surface, then knelt beside her. Hey, sweetie, do you want to talk about how you're feeling? She shrugged. I miss when Daddy used to tickle me. My chest tightened. I know. He's been stressed lately. But he loves you very much. Does he love you? The question hit me like a punch. I took a breath before answering. Yes. But sometimes grown-ups have problems they need to work through. She nodded, accepting that as an answer. I stayed with her until she lost interest in the crayons, then sent her upstairs to play. Once she was out of sight, I went to the office and opened my laptop. The first thing I did was log into our joint checking account. Daniel had left a balance of $12,400. I initiated a transfer of $5,000 to my new account at the credit union on Maple Street. The transaction would post tomorrow. By then, I'd have the separation paperwork ready to file. Next, I updated my password manager. Changed every password associated with our shared accounts. Email, banking, utilities, even the smart thermostat. I enabled two-factor authentication on everything, then logged out of all active sessions. I was halfway through the process when the doorbell rang. I froze, listening. A second later, the mail carrier's truck pulled away from the curb. I exhaled, then went to retrieve the package. It was a padded envelope addressed to Daniel, postmarked from a law firm in downtown Chicago. I didn't open it. Instead, I took it to the garage and placed it in the storage bin with the other evidence. The envelope from the PI was already there, along with the audio recordings and the printouts of Daniel's credit card statements. By the time I finished, it was nearly 5 o'clock. I made a quick dinner for Sophie, grilled cheese and tomato soup, then put her to bed. As I tucked her in, she murmured, I wish we were a family again. Me too, baby, I said, kissing her forehead. Me too. When she was asleep, I went back downstairs and called my mother. I need a favor, I said without preamble. Anything, she replied. Is everything okay? Not really. I explained the situation in broad strokes, omitting the worst details. I need a place to stay for a few weeks, just until I get sorted. There was a pause. Of course. You can bring Sophie here. Your father won't mind. Thank you. I swallowed hard. I appreciate this more than you know. We talked for a few more minutes, then hung up. I felt a flicker of relief. I wasn't alone anymore. At midnight, I heard the front door open. Daniel stumbled in, smelling of beer and cheap cologne. He stopped when he saw me sitting on the couch, wide awake. What are you doing up? He slurred. Waiting for you. His eyes narrowed. Did you go to a lawyer, maybe? He laughed. A harsh, brittle sound. You think you can take me down? You think anyone's going to believe your sob story? I don't need anyone to believe me, I said evenly. I have the facts. He crossed his arms. Well, good luck with that. Because when push comes to shove, You're the one who walked away from our marriage. Not me. I didn't walk away. I said. I was pushed. He rolled his eyes and headed for the stairs. Whatever helps you sleep at night. I waited until I heard his bedroom door close. Then went to the desk and opened the laptop. The transfer had posted. The new account was active. I stared at the balance for a long moment. Then closed the lid. The house was silent again. But this time, the silence felt like a shield. The invitation arrived in a thick cream envelope, engraved with gold script. I recognized the return address immediately, the River Oak Country Club, where Daniel played golf with his clients and occasionally brought home the smell of expensive cigars. I set it on the counter and let it sit there for a full minute before opening it. Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Harper request the pleasure of your company at a dinner celebrating Daniel's recent promotion to Senior Vice President. Saturday, 7:00 p.m. Black tie optional. I read the words without emotion, then placed the invitation back in its envelope. I had no intention of attending, but I made a mental note of the date. It would be useful to know when Daniel was planning to showcase his happy marriage to his colleagues. The next morning, I woke up before Sophie. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, reviewing the list of assets I'd compiled. The numbers were worse than I'd feared. Daniel had diverted nearly $18,000 into a separate account over the last 6 months. The total value of our joint assets, including the house, retirement accounts, and investments, was just over $450,000. If I played this right, I could walk away with at least $250,000 and full custody of Sophie. I was still poring over the spreadsheet when Sophie came barreling into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. "Mommy, I had a bad dream," she said, climbing into the chair beside me. "Want to tell me about it?" I asked, setting the tablet aside. "It was about Daddy," she whispered. "He was mad at you. And he yelled. And then he left and didn't come back." I forced a smile. "Daddy gets stressed sometimes, but he always comes back. He loves you very much." She nodded, but her lower lip trembled. I pulled her close, holding her until her breathing steadied. When she was calm, I sent her upstairs to get dressed. A few minutes later, the front door opened. Daniel came in, carrying a dry cleaning bag and a bottle of wine. He looked surprised to see me. "You're up early," he said. "So are you," I replied. He ignored the jab and set the wine on the counter. "I got us a bottle. Thought we could have a nice dinner tonight." I glanced at the label. A $75 Cabernet, the same brand he'd given his boss as a gift last month. "I have plans," I said. "Plans?" He frowned. "What kind of plans? Just dinner with a friend." I didn't mention that the friend was my divorce lawyer. He studied me for a moment, then shrugged. "Suit yourself. I'll be home around 7. I watched him head upstairs, then went back to the spreadsheet. I was adding up the value of his 401k when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Marissa. "Call me ASAP. New developments." I dialed her number immediately. "I just got off the phone with the PI," she said without preamble. "He's been following Daniel for the last 2 weeks. We have confirmation of the affair." My stomach clenched. "With who?" "Claire Whitaker. She works in the marketing department at his firm. They've been meeting at the Marriott in Rosemont at least twice a week. There are hotel receipts, restaurant charges, even a copy of her driver's license from the registration form." I closed my eyes. I thought something was off. "He's been so possessive lately." "It's guilt," Marissa said. "He's trying to justify his behavior by making you look unstable. But the evidence doesn't lie. We can use this in court to request a larger share of the assets, plus full custody." "What about the financial stuff?" I asked. "Has the PI found anything else?" "Not yet. But he's still digging. I'll let you know as soon as he does." We ended the call, and I sat there, staring at the spreadsheet. The numbers blurred together. But one thing was clear. Daniel had been living a double life, and I was the only one who didn't know. At noon, I picked Sophie up from school. On the drive home, she chatted about her day, oblivious to the tension in the air. "Mrs. Kramer said I'm getting better at math. She said proudly. That's great. Sweetie. I said, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. She also said I should tell my mom and dad to stop fighting. Is that true? Mummy, are you and Daddy fighting? I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were wide, searching for reassurance. We're not fighting, I said gently. We're just having some problems. But we're working on them. She nodded, accepting that as an answer. I turned onto our street and parked the car. As we got out, I noticed a man in a dark SUV watching us from across the road. He was leaning against the driver's side door, holding a camera. I froze, my heart pounding. Mommy, who's that? Sophie asked, tugging on my hand. No one, I said, hurrying toward the house. Let's go inside. I kept my head down until we were safely inside, then locked the door. I peered through the curtains, but the man was gone. I called Marissa immediately. The PI is tailing me. I said, I'll handle it. She replied, stay inside until I call you back. I spent the rest of the afternoon in the kitchen, making a batch of cookies for Sophie. The rhythmic motion of measuring flour and sugar calmed my nerves. When the cookies were in the oven, I called my mother. I need to ask you something. I said, anything. She replied, have you ever met Daniel's coworker, Claire? There was a long pause. I've seen her a few times. At the company Christmas party. She's very friendly. Friendly how? She was laughing with Daniel, touching his arm. I thought it was just harmless flirting. But now I'm not so sure. I thanked her and hung up. The pieces were falling into place. At 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a courier holding a large bouquet of red roses. For Mrs. Harper, he said, handing me the card. I read the message, sorry for the rough morning. I'll make it up to you tonight. Love, Daniel. I crumpled the card in my hand and tossed the flowers into the trash. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang again. This time it was a deliveryman with a bottle of champagne. From Mr. Harper, he said. I signed for it, then called Marissa. He's trying to create a paper trail. I said, gifts, dinners, the whole 9 yards. He thinks I'm going to play the victim. Let him, she replied. The more he tries to cover it up, the more obvious it becomes. I went upstairs to get ready for my dinner with a friend. I put on a simple black dress and a pair of low heels, then packed a bag with a change of clothes and Sophie's favorite stuffed animal. I left a note on the kitchen counter, went out for dinner. Be back late. Love, Evelyn. I drove to the townhouse I'd rented under my maiden name. It was a modest 2-bedroom, but it was mine. I let myself in, then called Marissa. I'm here, I said. Good. I've got the affidavit ready. We can file the separation papers first thing Monday morning. What about the pies report? I'll have it by Friday. Between the financial discrepancies and the affair, we have more than enough to secure a favorable outcome. I sat down on the couch, feeling the weight of the day lift off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control. At 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel. Where are you? I didn't reply. A minute later, he called. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short and angry. Answer your phone. Evelyn. This isn't funny. I silenced the ringer and set the phone aside. I was still sitting there an hour later when the doorbell rang. I froze, my heart pounding. I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. It was the man from the SUV, holding a small envelope. I didn't answer the door. Instead, I called the police. I have a strange man loitering outside my house, I said. He's been following me since this afternoon. The dispatcher promised to send a patrol car. And within minutes, blue and red lights flashed through the windows. I watched from the safety of the living room as the officer approached the man and questioned him. He handed over the envelope, then got back in his car and drove away. The officer knocked on my door. Everything okay? He asked. Yes, I said. Thank you. He handed me the envelope. It was from the PI, containing a single photograph. Daniel and Claire, arm in arm, leaving the Marriott. I stared at the image, my hands trembling. I'm sorry, the officer said. I know this must be hard. I nodded, unable to speak. When he left, I called Marissa. I have the proof, I said, my voice shaking. He's been lying to me this whole time. I'm on my way, she replied. Don't do anything until I get there. I sat on the couch, clutching the photograph, and waited. The mask had finally slipped, and I was ready. The police cruiser was still idling at the curb when Marissa's car pulled up. I watched from the window as she slammed the door and strode up the walkway, her briefcase in one hand, her phone in the other. She looked furious. You shouldn't be here, I said the moment she stepped inside. I know, she replied, closing the door behind her. But I'm not leaving you alone until we sort this out. I handed her the photograph. She stared at it for a long moment, then passed it to the uniformed officer who'd followed her in. Officer, I need you to file this as evidence, she said. It's part of an ongoing domestic investigation. The officer nodded and tucked the photo into an evidence bag. I'll need your contact information. I gave it to him, then turned back to Marissa. What happens now? Now we file the separation papers with the court, she said, dropping into the armchair. And we add a claim for emotional abuse and adultery. With this photograph, we have more than enough to prove Daniel's infidelity. I sank onto the couch, my legs suddenly weak. I can't believe he did this to us. I can, she said bluntly. Men like him always think they can have it all, the perfect wife, the perfect mistress, the perfect life, until it all comes crashing down. The officer cleared his throat. I need to ask you a few questions about the harassment. I nodded, and he pulled out a small notebook. When did you first notice the man following you? This afternoon, I said. He was parked across the street from our house. Did he make any threats? No. But he was taking pictures. I'm sure of it. I see. He jotted something down, then asked, has your husband ever threatened you or your daughter? I glanced at Marissa, who gave me a small nod. Yes, I said. He's said some very hurtful things. He told me he's done sleeping with me, that I disgust him. He's also made veiled threats about taking Sophie away from me. The officer's pen paused. I'll need to include that in my report. Do whatever you have to do, I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. When he was finished, he left, promising to expedite the evidence processing. Marissa closed the door and turned to me. You're sure about this? She asked. I've never been more sure of anything, I replied. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of legal forms. Then let's get to work. We spent the next 4 hours filling out the separation agreement, the child custody petition, and the financial disclosure forms. Every time I wrote Daniel Harper on a document, I felt a fresh wave of anger. How could he have done this to us? To Sophie? To me, here, Marissa said, sliding a form across the table. This is the affidavit of adultery. You'll need to sign it in front of a notary. I read through the document, my hands trembling. It was a formal statement swearing that Daniel had engaged in an extramarital affair with Claire Whitaker, that the relationship had been ongoing for at least 6 months, and that it had caused significant harm to our marriage. I can't believe I have to do this, I said, my voice cracking. I know, Marissa said softly, but it's necessary. The court needs to see the extent of his betrayal. I signed the form, then initialed each page. When I was finished, I slumped back in my chair, feeling drained. What's next? I asked. Tomorrow morning, I'll file these with the court, she said. In the meantime, I want you to pack a bag for you and Sophie. Just the essentials, clothes, toiletries, important documents. Keep it in the trunk of your car. Why? Because I have a feeling Daniel's going to retaliate. He's not going to take this lying down. I nodded, already dreading the confrontation to come. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. I made a quick breakfast for Sophie, then helped her get dressed. Where are we going today, Mummy? She asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. Just a little trip, I said, not meeting her gaze. We'll be back soon. I loaded the suitcases into the car, then called Marissa. I'm ready, I said. Good, she replied. I've already filed the papers. The court date is set for 2 weeks from today. What about Daniel? I've notified his attorney. He'll be served this afternoon. I hung up and took a deep breath. The plan was in motion. We'd been driving for less than an hour when my phone rang. It was Daniel. Where the hell are you? He barked. Out, I said, keeping my voice calm. Out where? What the hell is going on? Evelyn? I come home and the house is empty. You're gone. Sophie's gone. What the hell am I supposed to think? I needed some time to think. I said. Bullshit. He snapped. You're trying to take my daughter. Aren't you? You're trying to ruin me. I'm trying to protect my daughter. I said, my voice rising. Something you should have been doing all along. You bitch. He hissed. You think you're so perfect? You think you can just waltz out and leave me with nothing? I'll fight you every step of the way. I'll take Sophie and you'll never see her again. You can try. I said, my heart pounding. But the court is going to see the truth. They're going to see the man who cheated on his wife, who hid thousands of dollars, who verbally abused his family. They're not going to look kindly on that. Daniel. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. You're making a mistake, he said finally, his voice low and menacing. No, I said. I'm making a life. I hung up and turned to Sophie, who was watching me with wide eyes. Is Daddy mad at us? She asked. He's just confused, I said, forcing a smile. But we're going to be okay. Sweetie. I promise. We drove the rest of the way in silence, the weight of the conversation pressing down on me. When we arrived at the townhouse, I let us in, then called Marissa. He knows, I said. I'm not surprised, she replied. Listen, I've arranged for a security system to be installed here tomorrow. In the meantime, don't answer the door unless it's me or the police. Okay, I said, my hands shaking. And Evelyn, yeah, lock the doors. Every single one. And keep your phone with you at all times. I promised I would. Then hung up. Sophie was playing with her dolls in the living room, completely unaware of the danger we were in. I sat down beside her, my mind racing. How had it come to this? How had our life together deteriorated so quickly? I thought back to the early days of our marriage, to the promises we'd made to each other, to the dreams we'd shared. It seemed like a lifetime ago. Mommy, are we going to live here now? Sophie asked, interrupting my thoughts. For a little while, I said, smoothing her hair. Just until we figure some things out. She nodded, then went back to her game. I sat there for a long time, watching her play, and tried to imagine a future without Daniel. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The first blow came at 3 o'clock that afternoon. I was in the kitchen, making lunch, when the doorbell rang. I froze, my heart pounding. Who is it? I called out, not moving from my spot. It's me, Evelyn. A voice replied. Let me in. I recognized the voice immediately. It was David, Daniel's best friend and business partner. I'm not interested, I said, my voice cold. Come on, Evelyn, he said, his tone pleading. I'm on your side. I can help you. Just hear me out. I didn't answer. A moment later, he started pounding on the door. Evelyn, open up. This is important. I grabbed my phone and called the police. There's a man harassing me at my home, I said, my voice shaking. He won't leave. Within minutes, a squad car arrived. The officers confronted David, who claimed he was just checking on a friend. They warned him to stay away, then left. I was still shaking when Marissa called. What happened? She asked. David showed up, I said. He was pounding on the door, demanding to be let in. I'm not surprised, she said. Daniel's probably put him up to it. Listen, I'm coming over. I want to make sure you're safe. Okay, I said, relief flooding through me. Half an hour later, Marissa arrived, carrying a box of takeout and a 6-pack of bottled water. I thought you might need this, she said, setting the food on the counter. I thanked her, then told her about David's visit. He's just trying to intimidate you, she said, her voice grim. But it's not going to work. We have the law on our side. We ate in silence, the tension palpable. I'm scared, I admitted finally. I know, she said, reaching out to pat my hand. But you're doing the right thing. You're protecting yourself and Sophie. That takes courage. I nodded, but the fear didn't go away. The second blow came that evening. I was putting Sophie to bed when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel. I know where you are. I'm coming to get my daughter. I stared at the message, my blood turning to ice. What is it? Mummy? Sophie asked, looking up at me. Nothing. Sweetie, I said, forcing a smile. Go to sleep. I waited until she was asleep, then called Marissa. He knows where we are, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm on my way, she said, her voice sharp. Don't open the door for anyone except me or the police. I locked all the doors, then sat in the dark, clutching my phone, waiting. An hour later, Marissa arrived, along with 2 police officers. We're installing a security system tonight, she said, surveying the room. And the police will do extra patrols in the area. I nodded, my eyes fixed on the window. I'm sorry, I said, my voice breaking. I never meant for it to be like this. You don't have to apologize, Marissa said, squeezing my shoulder. You're the victim here. Remember that. The police installed the security system, then left. Marissa stayed with me until Sophie fell asleep, then drove home. I was alone in the house, surrounded by silence. When the final blow came, it was a knock at the door. I froze, my heart pounding. Evelyn, open up. Daniel's voice called out, low and menacing. I know you're in there. I can see your car. I didn't move. Open the door, or I'll break it down. He snarled. I called 911, then ran to the back of the house, crouching behind the couch. I'm at 1234 Maple Street, I said, my voice trembling. My husband is trying to break into the house. He's threatening me and my daughter. The operator promised that help was on the way. Then I heard the sound of splintering wood. Evelyn, Daniel roared, his voice echoing through the house. I'm coming for you. I covered Sophie with a blanket, shielding her as best I could. A moment later, the front door burst open, and Daniel stormed into the living room. You bitch! He shouted, spotting me. You think you can hide from me? You think you can take my daughter? I screamed, grabbing Sophie and backing away. Get away from us! I cried. Daniel lunged toward us, but the police tackled him before he could reach us. Stop resisting! One of the officers shouted, pinning him to the ground. I huddled on the floor with Sophie, sobbing, as the police arrested Daniel. You're under arrest for domestic violence and trespassing, the officer said, cuffing his hands behind his back. Daniel struggled against the cuffs, his face contorted with rage. This isn't over. Evelyn, he snarled. I'll get you for this. I swear I will. The police dragged him out of the house, and the silence that followed was deafening. I sat there for a long time, holding Sophie, until Marissa arrived. Are you okay? She asked, her voice gentle. I nodded, unable to speak. I'm so sorry, she said, pulling me into a hug. I cried into her shoulder, the weight of the day finally breaking me. The proof was undeniable, and the war was just beginning. The police cruiser's taillights disappeared around the corner, and the house fell into a silence so heavy it pressed against my eardrums. I sat on the floor with Sophie curled against my chest, her body trembling. The scent of smoke still clung to the air from where Daniel had kicked over the lamp in the living room. Mommy, she whispered, her voice muffled against my shirt. Is Daddy going to jail? I didn't answer right away. My hands were still shaking as I brushed the hair from her forehead. Yes, sweetheart. He broke the law. She nodded, her eyes wide. Will he come back? No, I said firmly. He won't. Marissa crouched beside me, her briefcase clutched to her chest. Her makeup was smudged, and her blouse was wrinkled from the long day. But her voice was steady. Evelyn, we need to get you and Sophie out of here. Now. I looked around the living room, at the broken glass, the overturned furniture, The smear of blood on the baseboard where Daniel had cut his hand on the picture frame. Where, my place? She said. Temporarily. I've already called my husband. He's on his way to pick us up. I hesitated. What about the house? The evidence, it's secured. She said, glancing at the security system's blinking control panel. The police have it under lock and key. We'll deal with the cleanup later. I stood, lifting Sophie into my arms. She buried her face in my neck. And I held her tighter. The weight of the past 24 hours settled on me like a lead blanket. But I forced myself to move. The drive to Marissa's house was quiet. Sophie fell asleep in the backseat, her thumb in her mouth, and I stared out the window at the passing streetlights. Marissa's husband, Tom, kept shooting me concerned glances in the rearview mirror, but he didn't say anything. When we arrived, Marissa's house was warm and bright, smelling faintly of garlic and lemon cleaner. Her 2 children, a boy and a girl, were huddled in the living room, watching a movie. They looked up as we came in, their eyes wide. Mom, is everything okay? The girl asked, her voice small. It's fine, Lily, Marissa said, her tone gentle. These are our friends. They're staying with us for a little while. I set Sophie down on the couch, and she immediately curled up against a throw pillow, her eyes fluttering closed. I'll make up the guest room, Marissa said, heading toward the stairs. I can help, I offered, but my legs felt like rubber. No, she said, pausing at the bottom of the steps. You need to rest. You've been through hell today. I nodded, too tired to argue. Marissa's husband, Tom, came over and put a hand on my shoulder. We're here for you, Evelyn. Anything you need. I managed a weak smile. Thanks. When they were gone, I sat down on the edge of the couch, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. The events of the day replayed in my mind like a horror movie. Daniel's face, contorted with rage, the sound of splintering wood, Sophie's terrified whimper. I thought about the photograph. The one the PI had given me. The one of Daniel and Claire arm in arm. I tucked it into my purse before we left the townhouse. And now I reached for it, unfolding the edges carefully. The image was grainy, taken from a distance. But there was no mistaking their body language. Daniel's hand was on the small of Claire's back, his head bent toward hers, his expression soft. The caption on the back, written in the pie's neat block letters, read, Marriott Rosemorn, 2:14, 8:17 p.m., Valentine's Day. The same day he'd given me a card that said, to my one and only, Happy Valentine's Day, Evelyn. I crumpled the photograph in my fist, then smoothed it out again. Evidence. Proof. Weaponry for the battle ahead. Marissa came back downstairs with a tray of sandwiches and a glass of milk for Sophie. Eat something, she said, handing me a plate. I shook my head. I'm not hungry. You have to keep your strength up, she insisted. This is far from over. I picked at the sandwich mechanically, chewing without tasting. Sophie woke up briefly to finish her milk, then fell back asleep, her cheek pillowed on her arms. Marissa sat down beside me, her own plate untouched. The police have filed the charges, she said. Domestic violence, criminal trespassing, and making terrorist threats. He's looking at serious jail time. Good, I said, my voice flat. Don't wish that on him, Marissa said sharply. He's still Sophie's father. He doesn't deserve that title. I shot back. He endangered her life tonight. Marissa sighed. I know you're angry, but we need to stay focused. The custody hearing is going to be brutal. He'll paint you as unstable, paranoid, vindictive. I am none of those things, I said, my voice rising. I know, she said, placing a hand on my arm. But he doesn't care about the truth. He cares about winning. I leaned back against the couch, exhaustion washing over me. What do? We gather more evidence, she said. We document everything. And we prepare for war. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Sophie's laughter drifting down the hallway. Marissa's children were playing with her in the backyard, their voices carrying through the open window. I dragged myself out of bed and pulled on the jeans and sweater Marissa had lent me. My clothes were still at the townhouse, packed in the trunk of my car. I'd have to retrieve them eventually, along with the rest of my belongings. Marissa was already in the kitchen, brewing coffee. She handed me a mug without asking. The police released him on bail last night, she said, her tone grim. He's not allowed within 500 feet of you or Sophie. But that's it. I stared at the coffee, willing myself to drink it. He'll be back. I know. She set a folder on the table. I spent the night going over the financials. Daniel's been embezzling from the company. I have bank statements showing a series of unauthorized transfers to a shell account in the Cayman Islands. I blinked. How much? Over $80,000 in the last year alone. She tapped the folder. This is a federal offense. Evelyn. If we can prove it, he'll lose his job, his reputation, everything. I felt a surge of hope. Fragile and bright. We can use this, absolutely. She leaned forward. But we need more. Witness statements. Internal memos. Anything that corroborates the paper trail. I nodded, my mind already racing. I can get access to his office computer. He leaves it unlocked when he goes to meetings. Marissa's eyes widened. That's risky. If he catches you, he won't. I said, my voice steady. I'll be careful. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Okay. But you have to be smart about it. We can't afford any more mistakes. I spent the rest of the morning with Sophie, helping her color and reading her stories. The normalcy of the activity was a balm, a brief respite from the chaos. In the afternoon, I drove to Daniel's office. I parked a block away and walked the rest of the way, keeping my head down. The building was sleek and modern, with a polished granite lobby and a security desk manned by a uniformed guard. Can I help you? The guard asked, eyeing me suspiciously. I'm here to see Daniel Harper, I said, forcing a smile. He's expecting me. The guard checked his clipboard, then nodded. Floor 12. Take the elevator to the left. I rode the elevator to the 12th floor. My heart pounding. The hallway was quiet, lined with frosted glass doors bearing the names of various executives. Daniel's office was at the end of the hall, the door slightly ajar. I peeked inside. Daniel was at his desk, speaking on the phone. His back was to me, and his computer screen was visible, displaying a spreadsheet filled with numbers. I slipped into the adjacent conference room and waited, my ears straining for any hint of movement. After a few minutes, Daniel hung up and stood up, stretching. He walked to the window, giving me a clear view of his desk. His computer was still unlocked. I waited until he disappeared into the hallway, presumably to use the restroom, then hurried into his office. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I copied the files I needed onto a flash drive. The spreadsheet detailing the Cayman Islands transfers was buried in a folder labeled Q for projections. But I found it quickly. Just as I was finishing, I heard footsteps approaching. I dove into the supply closet, clutching the flash drive, and held my breath. The door opened. Daniel. A woman's voice called out. Are you in here? It was Claire. My stomach churned. In the conference room. Daniel replied. His voice closer now. I heard the sound of a door closing. Then silence. I waited a full 5 minutes before emerging from the closet. The office was empty. I grabbed the flash drive and slipped out, my heart pounding. I made it back to the car without incident, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the ignition. When I got to Marissa's house, I handed her the flash drive without a word. She inserted it into her laptop and scanned the files, her expression growing more serious with each passing moment. This is it, she said, her voice hushed. This is the smoking gun. I nodded, my legs giving out. I collapsed onto the couch, my head in my hands. You're amazing, Marissa said, patting my shoulder. But you can't do this again. It's too dangerous. I didn't respond. The next few days were a blur of legal meetings, police reports, and sleepless nights. Marissa filed an emergency motion for a restraining order, citing Daniel's arrest and the evidence of his infidelity and financial crimes. The judge granted a temporary order, barring Daniel from contacting me or Sophie and giving me sole possession of the house. This is huge, Marissa said, her eyes bright. It establishes a precedent. The court is already seeing you as the responsible parent. I nodded, but the victory felt hollow. On the fourth day, I received a package in the mail. It was from Daniel, addressed in his precise, mechanical handwriting. I tore it open, expecting another tirade, but it was a manila envelope containing a single sheet of paper. It was a check, made out to me, for $10,000. The memo line read, "For Sophie." I stared at the check, my blood turning to ice. "What is it?" Marissa asked, looking up from her laptop. I handed her the check. She read it, then whistled low. "He's trying to buy your compliance," she said. "It's a classic manipulation tactic. He's testing the waters, seeing if you'll drop the charges in exchange for money." I crumpled the check in my fist. "He thinks I'm that easy to buy. He's about to learn otherwise," Marissa said, her voice grim. The following week, the court ordered a psychological evaluation for both Daniel and me. The results were damning. Daniel's report described him as narcissistic, controlling, and prone to violent outbursts under stress. The psychologist noted that his lack of empathy and remorse were significant risk factors for future abuse. My report was glowing. Ms. Harper is a resilient, highly functional individual who has demonstrated remarkable strength in the face of extreme adversity. The psychologist wrote, "Her primary motivation is the well-being of her daughter, and she shows no signs of instability or malice." Marissa practically danced around the living room when she read the report. "This is it, Evelyn. This is the nail in the coffin. The custody hearing is in 2 days, and we have everything we need to win." I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. The night before the hearing, I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. Sophie was curled up beside me, her breathing soft and even. I reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and felt a fresh wave of grief wash over me. Our family was broken. There was no fixing it. The only thing left to do was survive. The custody hearing was a media circus. Reporters lined the courthouse steps, their cameras flashing as we entered the building. Daniel was there, flanked by his attorney, a slick, shark-eyed man named Charles Whitaker. "Evelyn," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Isn't this a bit much? A little girl just wants her daddy." I ignored him, following Marissa into the courtroom. The judge, a stern woman with iron-gray hair, called the proceedings to order. The first hour was a blur of legal jargon and procedural nonsense. Then the real fun began. Charles called his first witness, Claire. She took the stand, her eyes downcast, her hands clasped demurely in her lap. She looked like a nervous schoolgirl, not a homewrecker. "Miss Whitaker," Charles said, his voice smooth, "can you describe your relationship with Mr. Harper?" "We're friends," she said, her voice barely audible. "Just friends?" he pressed. "Yes," she said, but her cheeks flushed. "And yet, you were seen at the Marriott Hotel on multiple occasions, correct?" I don't remember," she stammered. "You don't remember?" he asked, feigning surprise. "Or you don't want to remember?" "Objection," Marissa said, rising to her feet. Argumentative. The judge sustained the objection, but the damage was done. Charles smiled, then turned to me. "Mrs. Harper, isn't it true that you've been emotionally unstable for years? That you've subjected your husband to constant criticism and belittlement?" "Objection," Marissa said. "Relevance, Your Honor," Charles said, his voice oily. "We are simply trying to establish a pattern of behavior. A pattern of abuse. Sustained." The judge said. "Move on, Mr. Whitaker." Charles sat down, a smug look on his face. Marissa rose to cross-examine Claire. "Miss Whitaker," she said, her voice sharp, "did you know that Mr. Harper is embezzling funds from his company?" Claire paled. I had no idea. "Isn't it true that you've been pressuring him to leave his wife? To be with you?" "No," she said, but her voice wavered. "You didn't send him a text message saying, 'I can't wait to be with you'?" Daniel. I hate sneaking around. I don't remember. She stammered. You don't remember? Marissa repeated, her voice icy. Or you're lying. Objection, Charles said, rising to his feet. Counsel is badgering the witness. Overruled. The judge said. The witness will answer the question. Claire looked at Charles, who shook his head almost imperceptibly. Yes, she whispered. I sent that message. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Marissa smiled, then turned to the judge. Your Honor, I have no further questions for this witness. Claire fled the stand, her face in her hands. Charles was livid, but he couldn't recover. The rest of the hearing was a formality. The judge reviewed the evidence, the psychological reports, the restraining order, and the testimony. This court has considered all the evidence presented, she said, her voice stern, and it is the ruling of this court that custody of Sophie Harper shall be awarded to her mother, Ms. Evelyn Harper. The father shall receive supervised visitation rights, to be determined at a later date. I felt the weight lift off my shoulders, but it was replaced by a profound sense of loss. Daniel stood up, his face red with rage. This isn't over, he shouted, his voice echoing through the courtroom. You haven't heard the last of me. Evelyn. Security guards rushed forward, escorting him out of the room. Marissa hugged me, her eyes shining with tears. We did it, Evelyn. We won. I nodded, but I couldn't summon a smile. As we left the courthouse, the reporters swarmed us, their microphones thrust into our faces. Mrs. Harper, how does it feel to win custody, Mrs. Harper? Will you ever reconcile with your husband, Mrs. Harper? What do you say to his accusations? I ignored them, following Marissa to the car. Sophie was waiting in the back seat, her eyes wide. Mommy, she said. Did we win? Yes. Sweetheart, I said, my voice breaking. We won. She threw her arms around my neck, and I held her tight. The fallout was far from over, but for the first time in months, I felt like we had a chance. A small, fragile chance, but it was enough. The courthouse steps were still crowded with reporters when we got into Marissa's car. The lenses of their cameras glinted in the late afternoon sun, and their questions echoed through the windows even after we pulled away. I kept my head down, focusing on Sophie's small hand in mine. She was humming to herself, her thumb in her mouth, as if the last 3 hours had been nothing more than a minor interruption to her day. They're still out there, Marissa said, adjusting the rear-view mirror. I can see their van. I didn't respond. My mind was stuck on the judge's words, supervised visitation rights, to be determined at a later date. It was a victory, yes, but it wasn't absolute. Daniel could still appeal. He could still find a way to hurt us. We need to move fast, I said, my voice low. Before he regroups. Marissa nodded. I've already scheduled a meeting with the guardian ad litem for tomorrow. We need to solidify our position before Daniel's attorney files an appeal. I glanced at Sophie, who had fallen asleep against the seatbelt. What about her? She's been through enough. She's resilient, Marissa said gently, but she's also observant. She knows something's wrong. We need to give her stability, routine, something to hold on to. I nodded, though I wasn't sure how to provide that. Our house was still a crime scene. Our lives scattered across borrowed furniture and hastily packed bags. When we got back to Marissa's house, Tom had dinner on the table, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. The smell of garlic and thyme filled the air, and for a moment, I forgot about the chaos. Smells amazing, I said, forcing a smile. Eat up, Marissa said, dishing me a generous portion. You'll need your strength. I sat down at the table, my hands trembling as I lifted the fork. Sophie woke up long enough to eat a few bites, then retreated to the living room with a book. The police found more evidence at the house, Marissa said, lowering her voice. Daniel's journal. It's damning. I set down my fork. What does it say? He details the affair, the financial schemes, even his plans to discredit you in court. He writes about how he's training you to be submissive, How is breaking you down so you'll accept his version of reality? I felt the blood drain from my face. He wrote that, word for word. She slid a photocopied page across the table. Evelyn is weaker than I thought. A few well-placed insults and she starts to doubt herself. It's almost too easy. I stared at the words, my stomach churning. He'd documented his abuse like a scientist observing a lab rat. The clinical detachment made it worse. Somehow, we'll use this, Marissa said. It's proof of intent, of premeditation. It'll destroy his credibility in court. I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling of violation. He'd seen me, studied me, reduced me to a puzzle to be solved. After dinner, I helped Marissa with the dishes. My movements automatic. Sophie was curled up on the couch, engrossed in a picture book, and the house was quiet except for the clink of plates and the hum of the dishwasher. I'm sorry, I said, my voice barely audible. Marissa paused, a plate in her hands. For what? For dragging you into this. For making you complicit in all of it. She set the plate down and pulled me into a hug. You didn't drag me into anything. I'm your lawyer. This is what I do. But more importantly, she pulled back, holding my shoulders. You trusted me. That means everything. I leaned into her, letting the warmth of her embrace seep into my bones. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't alone. The next morning, I woke up early and dressed in one of Marissa's blouses and a pair of slacks I'd borrowed from her closet. Sophie was still asleep, her hair tangled in a riot of curls around her face. I smoothed it back, then kissed her forehead. Be good for Aunt Marissa, I whispered. She mumbled something unintelligible, then burrowed deeper into the pillow. Marissa was already in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through her tablet. Ready? She asked, looking up. I nodded, grabbing my purse. Let's do this. The Guardian ad litem's office was in a nondescript brick building on the edge of the city. A receptionist greeted us and led us to a small conference room, where a woman in her late 40s was waiting. She introduced herself as Linda Morales and offered us coffee, which we declined. I've reviewed the case files, she said, settling into her chair. And I've spoken with both parents. I'd like to hear from you, Evelyn, about your vision for Sophie's care. I took a deep breath, then launched into a description of our daily routine. Sophie's school schedule, her favorite activities. I spoke about the books we read together, the games we played, the way she liked her eggs in the morning. Linda listened intently, her expression unreadable. And what about Daniel? She asked when I finished. I hesitated. He's not a part of that vision. Not right now. I understand he's been difficult. She glanced at the file in front of her. But Sophie needs her father, Evelyn, even if he's made mistakes. I know, I said, my voice tight. But he's shown a pattern of abusive behavior. He's a danger to her. Linda nodded. I've seen the restraining order, the police reports. I'm not dismissing your concerns, but I need to be certain that supervised visitation is the only option. That there's no possibility of reconciliation, however remote. I met her gaze. There's no possibility. He's made that clear. She studied me for a long moment, then made a note in her file. I'll take that into consideration. Thank you for your honesty. The meeting lasted another hour, but it felt like a formality. Linda was thorough, professional, and fair-minded. I left feeling cautiously optimistic. She's on our side, Marissa said as we walked to the car. But she's also obligated to consider the child's best interests. We need to keep the pressure on. I nodded, my mind already racing with the next steps. The first blow came that afternoon. I was at the local library, researching child psychology textbooks, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You think you've won? Keep playing games, and you'll regret it. I stared at the message, my heart pounding. I showed it to Marissa, who immediately called the police. It's just a scare tactic, she said, her voice steady. But we'll report it anyway. I nodded, but the message had shaken me. It was a reminder that Daniel was still out there, still plotting, still dangerous. The second blow came the next day. I was in the kitchen, making lunch. When the doorbell rang, I froze, my hands hovering over the cutting board. "Who is it?" I called out, not moving. "It's the police." A voice replied, "We're here to serve a restraining order." I let them in, my legs shaking. The older officer handed me a manila envelope, his expression sympathetic. "This is a mutual restraining order," he said. "It prohibits both of you from contacting each other, directly or indirectly." I opened the envelope and scanned the document. It was standard legalese, but the final clause made my blood run cold. Both parties are prohibited from disparaging the other in the presence of the child. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It means you can't say anything negative about Daniel in front of Sophie," the officer said, "no matter what is done." I crumpled the order in my fist. "That's impossible." "I'm sorry," the officer said, "but that's the law." Marissa arrived a few minutes later, her face pale. "I've already spoken to the chief," she said, taking the order from my hand. "This is a standard tactic. He's trying to muzzle you, to prevent you from telling Sophie the truth about what's happening." "But how can I follow this?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "He's a liar, a cheat, an abuser. If I can't tell her the truth, how can I protect her?" "You don't have to tell her the details," Marissa said gently. "But you can reinforce that he's not a safe person. You can teach her to trust her instincts. You can be the stable, consistent presence in her life." I nodded, but the weight of the order pressed down on me like a physical force. The following week was a blur of legal wrangling and emotional exhaustion. Daniel's attorney filed an appeal, citing procedural errors in the custody hearing. The court set a date for the appeal hearing. 3 weeks away. "We'll be ready," Marissa said, her voice grim. "But we need to gather more evidence, more ammunition." I spent the next few days going through Daniel's things, cataloging the evidence we'd collected. The journal was the most damning piece. But there were other items, bank statements, credit card receipts, even a series of emails between Daniel and Claire that detailed their plans to leave me. I was in the process of scanning the emails when I found something unexpected. It was a message from Daniel to his brother, dated 2 months before our separation. "I'm planning to divorce Evelyn," it read. "She's become unbearable. I've met someone else, and I want out. But I need to make sure I get custody of Sophie. Any advice?" My hands shook as I read the words. He'd planned this. He'd been plotting our destruction for months. "Marissa," I called out, my voice shaking, "I need you to see this." She came running, her eyes widening when she read the email. "This changes everything," she said, her voice hushed. "It proves intent, premeditation. He didn't snap. He orchestrated this." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "He wanted to destroy us." Marissa pulled me into a hug. "No," she said fiercely. "He failed. And we're going to make sure he pays for it." The appeal hearing was a repeat of the custody hearing, but with higher stakes. Charles Whittaker was in top form, spinning a tale of a devoted father unjustly separated from his daughter. He called expert witnesses, psychologists who testified about the importance of father-child bonding. "Children need both parents," one of them said, his voice solemn, "especially in cases of divorce. Removing a father from the equation can have devastating long-term effects." Marissa cross-examined him mercilessly, exposing his biases and his ties to Daniel's attorney. By the time she was finished, the psychologist's credibility was in tatters. Then it was our turn. I took the stand, my hands gripping the rail for support. Linda Morales, the guardian ad litem, questioned me first. "Mrs. Harper," she said, her voice gentle, "can you describe your relationship with your husband prior to the separation?" I took a deep breath, then began to speak. I talked about the isolation, the criticism, the gradual erosion of my self-worth. I spoke about the nights I cried myself to sleep, the mornings I woke up dreading the sound of his key in the door. "He told me I was worthless," I said, my voice trembling, "that I was lucky he put up with me, that I'd never find anyone else." Linda's expression was unreadable, but I saw a flicker of sympathy in her eyes. And how did that affect your parenting? She asked. It made me hypervigilant. I said. I was so focused on surviving his abuse that I didn't have the energy to be the mother I wanted to be. But I never, ever took it out on Sophie. She was my sanctuary. The questioning shifted to Charles Whittaker, who attacked me with the precision of a surgeon. He questioned my stability, my motives, even my fitness as a mother. Mrs. Harper, he said, his voice oily. Isn't it true that you've been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder? I stiffened. That's a lie. Isn't it true that you've been hospitalized for psychiatric treatment? Objection. Marissa said, rising to her feet. Relevance. Your Honor. Charles said, turning to the judge. We are simply trying to establish a pattern of instability. The judge looked at me, her expression stern. Mrs. Harper. Is this true? I met her gaze. I was hospitalized once. 3 years ago. After a miscarriage. I suffered from severe depression. But I recovered fully. I have no history of personality disorders. The judge nodded. Overruled. Move on. Mr. Whittaker. Charles sat down. His face red with frustration. Marissa rose to redirect. Mrs. Harper. She said. Her voice sharp. Can you describe the day your husband was arrested? I took a deep breath. Then recounted the events of that night. The knock at the door. Daniel's threats. The sound of splintering wood. I spoke about holding Sophie. About shielding her with my body. About the terror I felt when I realized he was going to hurt us. I thought he was going to kill us. I said. My voice breaking. I would have died to protect her. The courtroom was silent. Marissa sat down. Her eyes shining with unshed tears. The judge deliberated for an hour. Then delivered her ruling. This court has considered all the evidence presented. She said. Her voice stern. And it is the ruling of this court that the previous custody arrangement shall stand. Supervised visitation for the father, with the specific conditions to be determined by the social worker. I felt the weight lift off my shoulders, but it was replaced by a profound sense of exhaustion. Daniel stood up, his face red with rage. This isn't over, he shouted, his voice echoing through the courtroom. You haven't heard the last of me. Evelyn. Security guards rushed forward, escorting him out of the room. Marissa hugged me, her arms tight around my shoulders. We did it. Evelyn. We won again. I nodded, but I couldn't summon a smile. As we left the courthouse, the reporters swarmed us, their microphones thrust into our faces. Mrs. Harper. What do you say to your husband's latest outburst, Mrs. Harper? Will you ever allow unsupervised visitation, Mrs. Harper? How does it feel to defeat him twice? I ignored them, following Marissa to the car. Sophie was waiting in the back seat, her eyes wide. Mommy, she said. Did we win? Yes. Sweetheart, I said, my voice breaking. We won. She threw her arms around my neck, and I held her tight. The counter-strike had been successful, but the war was far from over. Daniel was still out there, still plotting, still dangerous, but so were we. And we weren't going anywhere. The courthouse was still echoing with the sound of Daniel's final outburst when we got into Marissa's car. The reporters had thinned out, but a few diehards remained, their camera flashes popping like gunshots in the twilight. I kept my head down, my arms wrapped around Sophie, who was quietly singing to herself in the backseat. We need to get you home, Marissa said, her voice tight as she started the engine. Home. The word felt foreign. We'd been living out of borrowed spaces for so long that the concept of home had become abstract. A hazy memory of a life that no longer existed. I glanced at the townhouse in the distance. Its windows dark. The security system was in place. The locks changed. The evidence catalogued. It was a fortress now. A tomb for the life I'd built with Daniel. I can't go back there, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Marissa's hands tightened on the steering wheel. You don't have to. We'll find you a place. Something permanent. I nodded, but the thought of starting over, of building a new life from scratch, was overwhelming. I was tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of hiding. Tired of being afraid. I just want it to be over. I said, my voice cracking. It will be, Marissa said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. It just takes time. But time was the one thing I didn't have. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Sophie's voice drifting up from the living room. Mummy, look what I drew. I dragged myself out of bed and followed the sound to the kitchen, where Marissa was helping her color a picture. The table was covered in crayon marks and construction paper, and the air smelled faintly of toast. It's a family, Sophie said, holding up the drawing. This is you. And this is me. And this is Daddy. We're all smiling. I stared at the picture, my chest tightening. The image of Daniel, smiling and whole, felt like a punch to the gut. I wanted to rip it to shreds, to burn it, to erase it from existence. But I couldn't. Not in front of Sophie. It's beautiful, sweetie, I said, forcing a smile. Very colorful. Marissa gave me a warning look, then turned to Sophie. Why don't you go put that on the fridge? I'm sure Daddy would love to see it when he comes to visit. Sophie's face lit up. Really? You think he'd like it? I know he would, Marissa said, her voice gentle. I turned away, my eyes burning. The first blow came that afternoon. I was in the process of unpacking the last of our boxes when the doorbell rang. I froze, my hands hovering over a stack of Sophie's books. Who is it? I called out, my voice trembling. It's the movers. A gruff voice replied. We're here to pick up the rest of the stuff. I stared at the door, my mind racing. The movers. I'd forgotten all about them. Daniel had hired a team to clear out the house, to pack up his belongings and ship them to his new apartment. I'm not ready, I said, my voice barely audible. Look, lady, the man said, his patience wearing thin. We've got a schedule to keep. You said to come at 2. And it's 2:15. You want to pay for the extra time? I hesitated, then nodded. I couldn't afford to delay. Not with the court order hanging over my head. Not with the reporters camped outside. Not with the weight of everything pressing down on me. I let them in. And the next hour was a blur of boxes and bubble wrap. The men worked quickly, efficiently, their movements practiced and impersonal. I watched as they carried out the remnants of our life, the couch we'd bought on our honeymoon, the dining table where we'd shared our first meal as a married couple, the bed where Sophie had been conceived. You want us to take the mattress too? One of the men asked, nodding at the king-sized frame. I shook my head. No. Leave it. The man shrugged, and they hauled the mattress out to the truck. I stood in the empty living room, surrounded by the ghosts of our past, and felt a fresh wave of grief wash over me. Mummy. Sophie's voice was small. Why is the house so empty? I crouched down, taking her hands in mine. It's just a change, sweetie. We're making room for new things. She nodded, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. She was too young to understand the complexities of adult relationships, the slow erosion of love, the sudden collapse of a life built on lies. It's okay, I said, pulling her into a hug. Everything's going to be okay. But I didn't believe it. The second blow came that evening. I was in the kitchen, making dinner, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. I know what you're doing. I know you're trying to take everything from me. But you can't win. I'm not going down without a fight. I stared at the message, my blood turning to ice. I showed it to Marissa, who immediately called the police. It's the same number as before, she said, her voice grim. He's escalating. I nodded, but the message had shaken me. It was a reminder that Daniel was still out there. Still plotting. Still dangerous. We need to get you a new phone, Marissa said, her eyes scanning the room. Something with better security. I agreed, and she made a few calls. Within the hour, a new smartphone was delivered to the house, along with a crash course in digital security. Change all your passwords, she said, her voice firm. Enable two-factor authentication. Don't click on any links from unknown numbers. And for God's sake, don't respond to any more texts from him. I nodded, my hands trembling as I typed in the new passcodes. The following week was a blur of legal meetings and court appearances. The judge had ordered a psychological evaluation for Daniel to determine his fitness for supervised visitation. The results were damning. He's a narcissist, the psychologist said, his voice clinical, highly manipulative, lacking in empathy, prone to violent outbursts. The risk of harm to the child is significant. Marissa practically danced around the living room when she read the report. This is it, Evelyn. This is the final nail in the coffin. The court will revoke his visitation rights entirely. I nodded, but the victory felt hollow. The day of the final hearing was bright and cold. The sky a hard, unforgiving blue. I dressed in a simple black suit, the only one I owned, and pinned a small brooch to the lapel. Sophie wore a matching dress, a hand-me-down from Marissa's daughter, and her hair was tied back in a neat braid. You look beautiful, I said, smoothing her collar. She beamed at me, then took my hand. Can we go now? Mummy, I want to see the judge. I forced a smile. Not yet, sweetie. We have to wait our turn. The courthouse was packed, the benches filled with reporters and curious onlookers. Daniel was there, flanked by his attorney, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't look at me, not once, but I could feel his eyes on me, burning into my skin. The hearing was a formality. The judge reviewed the evidence, the psychological reports, the restraining orders. She listened to the testimony of the social worker, who described Daniel's volatile behavior during the supervised visits. The child is clearly frightened of her father, the social worker said, her voice gentle. She clings to the supervisor, refuses to make eye contact, and has even wet herself during one of the sessions. I felt the blood drain from my face. I hadn't known about that. I'd been so focused on my own pain that I'd neglected to ask about Sophie's experience. I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice breaking. Marissa put a hand on my shoulder. It's not your fault. The judge nodded, her expression grave. This court has considered all the evidence presented, and it is the ruling of this court that all visitation rights for the father are hereby terminated. The child shall remain in the sole custody of the mother. I felt the weight lift off my shoulders, but it was replaced by a profound sense of loss. Daniel stood up, his face red with rage. This isn't over, he shouted, his voice echoing through the courtroom. You haven't heard the last of me, Evelyn. I'll find a way to get her back. I swear I will. Security guards rushed forward, escorting him out of the room. Marissa hugged me, her arms tight around my shoulders. We did it, Evelyn. We won. It's over. I nodded, but the tears wouldn't stop. As we left the courthouse, the reporters swarmed us, their microphones thrust into our faces. Mrs. Harper, how does it feel to have won full custody, Mrs. Harper? Will you ever forgive your husband, Mrs. Harper? What's next for you and Sophie? I ignored them, following Marissa to the car. Sophie was waiting in the back seat, her eyes wide. Mommy, she said, is it really over? I took a deep breath, then turned to her. Yes, sweetheart, it's over. She threw her arms around my neck, and I held her tight. The reckoning was complete, but the scars would never fade. The courthouse was still echoing with the finality of the judge's ruling when we got into Marissa's car. The air felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted. But the relief was tempered by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Sophie was curled up in the backseat, her eyes drooping, her thumb in her mouth. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, and my heart ached. She'd been so brave through everything, but I could see the toll it had taken. The dark circles under her eyes, the way she flinched at loud noises, the way she still sometimes called me mommy in a small, uncertain voice, as if testing to see if the words still applied. She's going to be okay, Marissa said, her voice gentle, as if reading my mind. She's resilient, and she has you. I nodded, but the truth was, I wasn't sure I was okay. I was just numb. The fight had consumed me for so long that I didn't know who I was without it. Where to now? Marissa asked, glancing at me. I looked out the window at the city passing by. The buildings and the people and the traffic, all of it blurring together. I don't know. I said finally. Just drive. We didn't talk much on the way back to the townhouse. Sophie fell asleep within minutes, and the silence in the car was heavy but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm, when the wind has died down but the air is still charged with electricity. When we got back, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The movers had taken everything, and the emptiness felt oppressive. I stood in the living room, looking at the bare walls, the scuffed floor, the single window that overlooked the street. It was a stranger's house now, a place I'd lived in but never really belonged to. I can't stay here, I said, more to myself than to Marissa. I know, she said, her voice soft. I've been looking at a few places. Nothing fancy, just something safe and stable for you and Sophie. I turned to her, my eyes burning. I can't afford anything. Not on my salary. Not with the legal fees, I've already taken care of it, she said, cutting me off. I've set up a trust fund for Sophie, and I've arranged for a small monthly stipend for you. It's not much, but it'll help until you get back on your feet. I stared at her, my mouth agape. You can't do that. I can't let you, it's not charity, she said, her voice firm. It's an investment. In you. In Sophie. In justice. I felt the tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll let me help, she said, stepping closer. Say you'll let me be there for you, the way you were there for me when I needed it. I nodded, unable to speak. The next few days were a blur of activity. Marissa found us a small apartment on the north side of the city, a 2-bedroom with a fenced-in yard and a view of the park. It was nothing like the house we'd left behind, but it was ours. I signed the lease, and the movers came the next day, transferring the last of our belongings from the townhouse. Sophie was thrilled with the new place. She claimed the smaller bedroom as her own, decorating it with stickers and drawings and a collection of mismatched stuffed animals. I set up a small desk in the corner, where I could work on my graphic design projects, and a cozy reading nook in the living room, where we could curl up with books. It's our home now, I said, looking around at the bare walls. Sophie beamed at me. Can we get a dog? Mummy? A puppy? Please, I laughed. A real, genuine laugh. And felt something inside me loosen. Maybe someday. But for now, let's just enjoy what we have. The first real test came a week later. I was in the kitchen, making dinner, when the doorbell rang. I froze, my hands hovering over the cutting board. Who is it? I called out, my voice trembling. It's the police. A familiar voice replied. We're here to follow up on a report. I let them in, my heart pounding. The same 2 officers from before, the ones who'd served the restraining order, gave me a sympathetic look. We've had another report of harassment, the older officer said, his expression serious. Same number. Same MO. Threatening texts. Implied violence. We've traced it to a burner phone registered to a P.O. box in Cicero. I nodded, my mind racing. Cicero. That was Daniel's old stomping grounds, the neighborhood where he'd grown up. It made sense that he'd use it to cover his tracks. We've also heard reports of a man matching his description lurking around the school. The younger officer added, we've increased patrols in the area. But you need to be careful. If you see him, call us immediately. Do not approach him. I nodded, my hands shaking. I understand. When they left, I called Marissa, who immediately arranged for a security system to be installed in the apartment. This is getting out of hand, she said, her voice tight. I'm going to file for a permanent restraining order. One that includes a no-contact clause and a geographic restriction. He won't be able to come within 1,000 feet of you or Sophie. I agreed, grateful for her efficiency. The restraining order came through a few days later. And with it, a sense of cautious relief. The no-contact clause meant Daniel couldn't call, text, or email me. And the geographic restriction meant he couldn't come near our home, Sophie's school, or the park where we spent our weekends. It's not foolproof, Marissa warned, but it's the best we can do for now. I nodded, Clinging to the small measure of security it provided, life slowly settled into a new rhythm. I found a part-time job at a local design firm, working remotely, and Sophie started at a new school, where the teachers were kind and the other kids were welcoming. We made new friends, joined a playgroup, and even started going to church on Sundays. It was a quiet, ordinary life, the kind I'd always dreamed of but never thought I'd have. And it was everything I'd ever wanted. But the past has a way of intruding on the present. It came in the form of a letter, delivered by courier to the apartment. I recognized the return address immediately, the law firm representing Daniel's company. I opened it with trembling hands, dreading what I might find. The letter was short and to the point. It informed me that Daniel had been fired from his position as senior vice president, effective immediately. For gross misconduct and embezzlement. The company was pursuing legal action, and I was named as a co-defendant, since the embezzled funds had been transferred to our joint account. I stared at the letter, my blood turning to ice. I'd known about the embezzlement, of course, but I'd assumed it was Daniel's problem, not mine. I'd even given the evidence to Marissa, who'd used it in court. "This is a setup," I said, my voice shaking. When I called her, "I know," she said, her voice grim. "I'll handle it. Don't worry." But I did worry. I worried about the legal fees, the potential loss of the house, the impact on Sophie. I worried about the reporters, who'd surely jump on the story, and the judgment of our new friends, who'd see me as a fraud, a liar, a cheat. "I can't do this again," I said, my voice breaking. "You don't have to," Marissa said, her voice gentle. "I'm here. I'll take care of everything." And she did. She hired a forensic accountant to trace the funds, a criminal defense attorney to represent me, and a public relations specialist to handle the media. She worked tirelessly, day and night, to clear my name and protect our assets. "You're not alone in this," she said, her voice firm. "I'm not going anywhere." I believed her. The legal battle was long and ugly, but in the end, we won. The forensic accountant proved that I'd had no knowledge of the embezzlement, and the criminal defense attorney convinced the DA to drop the charges. The company settled out of court, agreeing to drop the lawsuit in exchange for a small payment from Daniel's personal account. "It's over," Marissa said, collapsing into a chair, her face pale. "Finally." I nodded. But the relief was tempered by a deep sense of loss. The house was gone. The savings were depleted. And the life we'd built was in ruins. But we were alive. We were safe. And that was enough. The final blow came a month later, in the form of an email from Daniel. It was short and to the point. A single sentence. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time, my heart pounding. I wanted to delete it, to ignore it, to pretend it had never been sent. But something in me refused to let it go. "What do I do?" I asked Marissa, showing her the email. "It's up to you," she said, her voice gentle. "But I wouldn't recommend it. He's not sorry. He's just trying to manipulate you again." I knew she was right. But I couldn't help myself. I replied, my fingers trembling, "I have nothing to say to you." The response was immediate. "Please, Evelyn, just give me a chance to explain. I need to see Sophie." I stared at the message, my chest tight. I wanted to see him, to look him in the eye and tell him what he'd done, to make him understand the depth of his betrayal. But I knew it was a bad idea. "Don't do it," Marissa said, when I showed her the message. "He'll only hurt you again." I deleted the email, then deleted his address, then deleted the entire account. I closed the laptop, then closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. The silence after was profound. It was the absence of his voice, his lies, his manipulations. It was the absence of the constant fear, the gnawing anxiety, the suffocating sense of dread. It was the absence of the person who had defined my life for so long. For better or worse, it was just me and Sophie, and the quiet, ordinary life we were building together. It was enough. Epilogue. 6 months later, the studio was quiet. save for the hum of the air conditioner and the soft scratch of my pencil on the sketchpad. I was working on a new design, a logo for a local bakery, and the lines were coming together perfectly. "Mummy," Sophie's voice drifted in from the living room. "Look what I made," I smiled, setting down my pencil. "I'm coming, sweetie." I found her in the living room, surrounded by a mountain of construction paper and glue sticks. She held up a lopsided card, her face beaming. "It's for you," she said, her voice proud. "Happy Mother's Day." I took the card, my eyes misting. It was crude. Of course. The letters uneven, the colors mismatched. But it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "I love it," I said, pulling her into a hug. She beamed at me, then pointed to the drawing on the front. "That's you. And that's me. And that's the house. We're all happy." I stared at the drawing, my heart aching. The house was a simple square, with a triangle roof and a round sun in the corner. It was nothing like the house we'd left behind. But it was ours. It was home. "It's perfect," I said, my voice breaking. Sophie beamed at me, then went back to her project, her small hands busy with the glue stick. I sat down on the couch, holding the card, and let the tears fall. It was over. The fight was over. The healing had begun. And the silence after was finally, blessedly, peaceful.